Chapter 7. Is the Captain Having a Breakdown? Greg said to Ted as they went into the storeroom, "What do you think of our trip so far?" "Well, as far as excitement, pretty good. If you're asking if I regret it, then no. I'm not so certain about the return trip." Greg replies, "I agree. I'm not so sure what the black hole is about or just what we need to study it, or at least go through it. Oh, you know us humans. If something is there, we can't stand not knowing something and everything about it." In the storeroom, just after a few minutes, Greg says, "Look what I found. Do you think this will work?" There, sitting on a shelf, were several boxes labeled bird food. Ted says, "That was too fast. Suspicious if you ask me. Maybe you need to take a few minutes more just to make sure they know we're doing our job." Greg laughed, lay down on the floor, and closed his eyes. Ted gave him a light kick and said, "Not that long. Get up. And let's take a box of this birdseed back with us. I do have a couple of things to check, and I'm sure you do too." Greg got up and said, "Yes, I do. And it was your idea to delay going back. I didn't think you would agree so quickly. I think you're changing. You would never have agreed to something like that before." Greg replies, "You said I needed to loosen up. Just can't seem to please you." Ted gave him a jab in his ribs as they closed and locked the storeroom door. They showed the bird food to the other guys. Pete pushed his button and said, "Hey, they found some actual bird food." Captain Jim radios back, "Pour about half a cup in one of those plastic cups and give it to Al. He'll be there in a couple of minutes." Ted asked, "How are they doing out there? Do you think we could maybe go out there?" He hadn't noticed they were all motioning him to be quiet, but it was too late. Captain Jim says in a loud voice, "Just do as you're told. I'll let you know when you can do something else." Pete handed Al the birdseed when he came to the door. Al leaned close and said, "Keep listening. I may need help soon. You won't need your spacesuit. The air's good. Gravity is heavy." Captain Jim calls, "What is taking so long?" Al yells back, "Be right there. Just spilled a little." He whispered, "See what I mean?" He left with the bird food. Pete motioned for George to keep listening and motioned for Ted and Greg to follow him. When they got to the second level, he motioned them into a far corner and said, "There's something wrong with the captain. At times, he doesn't even sound like the same person. Al says he may need help. We don't need spacesuits out there as the air's fine, but the gravity is heavy. So if Al calls for help, we three are to go. And George will stay and monitor things." Greg asks, "Any idea what it is?" "No, but have your medical bag ready if we're called." Greg says, "I don't like this. I'm not a doctor, only a practitioner. No one mentioned a serious illness." "Well, you will just have to do the best you can," replied Pete. "Now let's get back before we're missed." Just as they got to the first level, he heard the captain call his name. He grabbed the mic and said, "Yes, Captain. What do you need?" "I think you better get out here. I think Al's having some sort of breakdown. I had to hit him hard to get him off me." "Okay, we'll be right there." Greg grabbed his bag, Ted grabbed a couple of bottles of water, and Pete grabbed a couple of hand towels. George says, "Good luck, guys. Call if there's anything I can do." Pete says, Just lock the door after us and monitor what's going on. I will call if there's anything we need." As they were going out the door, Pete grabbed a small metal bar hanging on the wall, and Ted grabbed the tongs. Neither had any idea why they did it, but that it seemed like a good idea. When they got out there, the captain had Al on the ground with his foot on Al's face. Al was moving, but they could see he was weak. Pete tells the captain, "Okay, you can remove your foot. We have him." Captain Jim says, "What are they doing out here? I called only you. Now step away while I grind his face into the ground." By this time, Greg was behind the captain. He ran his hands under the captain's arm and laced his fingers together and pulled him backwards. They would have both gone to the ground, but Ted ran over to help. The captain was yelling and screaming in a voice they had never heard before. The words coming out of his mouth weren't any language they had ever heard before. Pete, seeing they weren't going to be able to hold him, helped them get him to the ground and sat on him until Greg got his bag and gave the captain a shot of something. Greg says, "That won't hold him long." They used one of the towels to tie his hands behind his back and the other to tie his ankles together. Pete says, "Those won't hold him long either. See about Al. I'll look through your bag for something stronger in case we need it." Ted asks, "What will we do if we don't find something to hold him?" That was scary. He reminded me of something I saw before, but I don't know what. Pete says, "I know exactly what he sounded like, but give me a few minutes to talk to Al before I tell you." Greg says, "I do have something stronger if we need it. I'll explain later." Al was sitting up with a bottle of water. His face was badly bruised. Pete asks, "Are you up to telling us what happened?" Al looked around and saw the captain on the ground and said, "Make sure you have him good." Pete tossed the metal rod to Ted and said, "Use it if necessary." Al drank some more water and said, "We were just looking around and talking about everything. I came to get the bird food, and as I got back, he turned, and all the little birds flew away. He got a crazy look on his face and reached for the bird food. He grabbed it and held it up to his mouth to pour it in. I tried to grab it back, and most of it spilled on the ground. But he got some in his mouth and started eating or swallowing. And then he started squawking like that bird from this morning. I tried to talk to him, but he grabbed me and started hitting me. I tried to fight back, and you all know how strong I am. I was no match for him. He hit me on the head with his fist and knocked me to the ground, and before I knew it, he had his foot on my face in such a way I couldn't do anything about it. My arms were so heavy I couldn't lift them. I think he wanted to kill me." Pete says, "We can't take him back to the ship like this. We will have to keep him out here for now. What we have on him now isn't going to hold him once he comes to. Greg, how much more of that stuff do you have?" Greg says, "Only one more out here. The rest are locked away in the safe. I think the captain is the only one with a code." Al says, "No, I have it also, and I think George has it." George came over to the speaker and said, "Yes, I have it. Do you need something out of it?" Pete says, "No, but if Greg needs something, let him in, or if he tells you what to get out of it." Greg said, "Pete, I think you are saying you think that bird thing from this morning has taken over him. Am I right?" Pete says, "I don't believe in such things, but I think we are seeing it for the first time. Ted says, I saw some wire in the storeroom. Do you think that will work? Al says, no, but there are some chains down there, and get something to fasten the chains together. Ted asks, chains? Are you serious? Al says, it took all three of you to wrestle him to the ground. What do you think? Ted says, you're right. I just have trouble thinking of chaining our captain. Al says, just look at it this way. If that thing is allowed to get into the spaceship, we are goners, including the captain. Ted and Al went to the door, and George let them in. They went to the storeroom and found some chains and bolt fasteners. George got another needle of the serum Greg asked for and gave it to them. George was as pale as a ghost. They could tell he was scared, but knew if they mentioned it, he would have to be revived. George told them he had also cooked another can of biscuits in case they needed it. Ted said, George, good thinking. Find something we can do without. Cool the biscuits and crumble them into the container. I'll let you know the next step. As they walked back to the captain, Al said, good thinking. He needed something to do. They found a small but sturdy-looking tree. They pulled the captain over and sat him against it. They kept his hands tied with a towel, wrapped the chains around his body, and fastened them with the bolt fasteners around the tree. Al said, now, what do we do? How are we going to get the captain back? Pete says, I have an idea. Do any of you know about the makings of a rabbit trap? They all said that they knew about them, but how were they going to build one? He said, I'll be right back. I think you should keep trying to get some water down the captain. George, I'm coming in. Open the door. After about 5 minutes, he came back with a big, heavy box and the biscuit crumbs. The box was so heavy, George had to help him out the door, and Pete hurried over to help him the rest of the way. They put the box upside down about 10 feet directly in the captain's line of sight. Pete took the metal rod and the tongs under the front edge, holding it up. He took a heavy wire and wrapped it around the tongs. He then took the container of biscuits and put them inside the box. They all backed away and out of the sight of the captain or the box. Soon, the captain started moving and trying to get to the box. They had done a good job of tying him up, and he just couldn't get to the biscuits. They waited, hoping it would work. After a good 5 minutes, the bird appeared and walked right under the box. They grabbed the wire, and they all gave a fast and hard pull, and the box fell over, trapping the bird. But the box wasn't heavy enough, and he started raising it up, but Greg and Ted ran over and sat on it. The bird was still trying to raise the box. Al went over and sat on it too. Pete asked George, do you know how to lock the door from the outside? Yes, but I don't know how we can get back in. Pete says, that's okay, I know how. I need your help right now. George was there in only a few minutes. He went with Pete off down the path. The bird was having a screaming fit, trying to get out of the box. He was also trying to get into one of their minds, but Greg said, Sing or talk as loud as you can." He started singing in a loud voice, "Roll, roll your boat." Everyone joined in, singing the same phrases over and over. It wasn't long before Pete and George came back with a huge rock, almost more than the two could carry. They put it on the box and asked Al to go with them for more. They brought back 3 more large rocks, and Greg went back with them. They came back with 4 more. There wasn't room for any more, but it seemed to be enough. Greg told Pete to get the door open, and he and George to meet them at the contamination shower. Then Greg, Ted, and Al unchained the captain cautiously and carried him to the ship in front of the shower door. Pete opened the door and helped them get into the shower. There was hardly enough room for all of them, but they were afraid of what the captain might do when he came to. They got him bathed, into clean clothes, and into his bed. Al says, "I will stay with him until you get everything set up." Greg says, "No, you go get a hot shower and clean your face and put this ointment on it." Al says, "I don't think I can stand touching it." Greg replies, "That is why I said a hot shower. Even if it doesn't sound right, the hot water will feel so good you'll hardly feel the discomfort. While you do that, they can start setting things up. You can come back and give me a couple of minutes to set up my part, okay?" Al tries to smile and says, "I think I'm being set up, but I'll go along with it." He left. Pete said, "Most everything's ready. Ted is still working on the reverse directions, and George's helping. And yes, he really is being a help. I'll be back in just a few minutes so that you can get your things together." Greg replies, "Thank you. I didn't really want Al to stay with him. I know how close they are, and Al feels guilty about what happened. Al couldn't have done anything different." Greg smiles, but he does. "Go get things started." Pete was back soon as promised and said, "We only have a couple of minutes before Al comes back. You go get ready and I'll stay until you get back. When Al gets back here, I'll keep him talking until you get back." How soon before the captain starts waking up? I have no idea. Normally he would have started about 10 minutes ago. I thought he was coming right after we got him to bed. But I started talking softly to him, and he went back to sleep. Pete says, "I hope we at least get off the ground before he comes out of it. He may not be happy we took over the ship." I understand. I won't be long. I just need to get a few things to treat him with as he needs it. I need to give him some fluids, but I can't seem to find the equipment needed. Pete says, "I saw it earlier. I'll be right back." He was, and sure enough, he had everything he needed. Greg says, "You may have just saved his life. Can you stay a few minutes longer to help me?" Al walked in and said, "I can do that." Pete said, "Greg, I'll be right back and you can do your thing." Al and Greg got the captain hooked up to the IV machine. Al asks, "Will this bring him out of this?" Greg says, "I don't know how much he needs this fluid, but when he gets enough, it should help him come to." Al asked, "You do know what we're planning to do, don't you?" Greg put his finger to his lips and said, "Yes." I think we will all enjoy that as soon as the captain is able." For a second or two, Al looked as if he didn't understand, then smiled and said, "Yes, we should enjoy it." As they talked small talk, Pete came back and said, "Greg, I'll take over until you do your thing. Al, you are needed to help George and Ted with that thing they are trying to do." That went smoother than Pete had hoped. He sat down to get a few minutes to relax. He knew what was about to happen was going to be hard on everyone.